there, Larson Heights, and welcome to Bedtime Stories with Mrs Schotzko. So I'm going to do a couple of things. For the littles, we are reading picture books, but for the third, fourth, and fifth graders, the guys that really like a little bit older stuff, the fifth graders picked a book. Next time, the fourth graders get to pick the book, and after that, the third graders get to pick the book, but this time it was the fifth graders. And they picked Holes by Louis Satcher. We are going to read one chapter every single night. So I have a dog, as you can just tell. He's kind of a turkey, and he's super grumpy with me right now because I'm paying attention to you and not to him. So I'm trying to feed him treats to keep him quiet, but we'll see how this works out. Lyosha, come here. Come on, come get a cookie. So part one, you are entering Camp Green Lake. There is no lake at Camp Green Lake. There once was a very large lake here, the largest lake in Texas. That was over 100 years ago. Now it is just a dry, flat wasteland. There used to be a town of Green Lake as well. The town shriveled and dried up along with the lake and the people who lived there. During the summer, the daytime temperature hovers around 95 degrees in the shade, if you find any shade. There's not much shade in a big, dry, flat lake. The only trees are two old oaks on the eastern edge of the lake. Lake in quotation marks. A hammock is stretched between the two trees, and a log cabin stands behind that. The campers are forbidden to lie in the hammock. It belongs to the warden. The warden owns the shade. Out on the lake, rattlesnakes and scorpions find shade under rocks and in the holes by the campers. Here's a good rule to remember about rattlesnakes and scorpions. If you don't bother them, they won't bother you. Remember that. It's important here in Moses Lake too. If you don't bother them, they won't bother you. It doesn't mean you shouldn't still stay away from them though. So there's a good rule to remember about rattlesnakes and scorpions. Oh, I already read that part. Usually. Being bitten by a scorpion or even a rattlesnake is not the worst thing that can happen to you. You won't die, usually. Sometimes a camper will try to be bitten by a scorpion or even a small rattlesnake. Then he will get to spend a day or two recovering in his tent instead of having to dig a hole out in the lake. But you don't want to be bitten by a yellow-spotted lizard. That's the worst thing that can happen to you. You will die a slow and painful death, always, every single time. If you get bitten by a yellow-spotted lizard, you might as well go into the shade of the oak trees and lie in the hammock. There is nothing anyone can do to you anymore. Chapter 2. The reader is probably asking, why would anyone go to Green Lake or Camp Green Lake? Most campers weren't given a choice. Camp Green Lake is a camp for bad boys. No bad boys at Larson Heights. I know that. If you take a bad boy and make him dig a hole every day in the hot sun, it will turn him into a good boy. At least that was what some people thought. Stanley Yelnats was given a choice. The judge said, you may go to jail or you may go to Camp Green Lake. Stanley was from a poor family. He'd never been to camp before. Chapter 3. Stanley Yelnats was the only passenger on the bus, not counting the driver or the guard. The guard sat next to the driver with his seat turned around facing Stanley. A rifle lay across his lap. Stanley was sitting about 10 rows back, handcuffed to his armrest. His backpack lay on the seat next to him. It contained his toothbrush, toothpaste, and a box of stationery his mother had given to him. He'd promised to write to her at least once a week. He looked out the window, although there wasn't much to see, mostly fields of hay and cotton. He was on a long bus ride to nowhere. The bus wasn't air-conditioned, and the hot, heavy air was almost as stifling as the handcuffs. Stanley and his parents had tried to pretend that he was just going away to camp for a while, just like the rich kids do. When Stanley was younger, he used to play with stuffed animals and pretend the animals were at camp. Camp Fun and Games, he called it. Do you think that this is going to be Camp Fun and Games? Hey, come here. Lyosha, come on. Camp Fun and Games, he called it. Sometimes he'd have them play soccer with a marble. Other times they'd run an obstacle course or just go bungee jumping off a table or I'm going to start that one Other times they'd run an obstacle course or go bungee jumping off a table tied to broken rubber bands. Now Stanley tried to pretend he was going to Camp Fun and Games. Maybe he'd make some friends, he thought. At least he'd get to swim in the lake. Although we know there's really no lake, right? It's just flat and sounds like holes. Okay, he didn't have any friends at home. He was overweight, and the kids at his middle school often teased him about his size. Even his teachers sometimes made cruel comments without realizing it. On his last day of school, Lyosha, come here, boo-boo, Lyosha. Sorry, he's super creepy. I've been gone all day, it's been snowing, and he's been stuck inside, and now I'm reading to you guys, but I love reading to you guys, even if he's not loving it. Lyosha, come here. Come on, come get a cookie. Hey, Lyosha, come on. Hey, boo-boo. Okay, we're just gonna keep going and hope that it turns out okay. I'll look at the video and see. So, on his last day of school, his math teacher, Mrs. Bell, taught ratios. As an example, she chose the heaviest kid in the class and the lightest kid in the class and had them weigh themselves. Stanley weighed 3 times as much as the other boy. Mrs. Bell wrote the ratio on the board, 3 to 1, unaware of how much embarrassment she'd caused both of them. Okay, that sounds really sad. Has anything like that ever happened to you guys? I hope not, because we try really hard to make sure that doesn't. Stanley was arrested later that day. He looked at the guard who sat slumped in his seat and wondered if he had fallen asleep. The guard was wearing sunglasses, so Stanley couldn't see his eyes. Stanley was not a bad kid. He was innocent of the crime for which he'd been convicted. He'd just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was all because of his no good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-grandfather. He smiled. It was a family joke. Whenever anything went wrong, they always blamed Stanley's no good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-grandfather. Supposedly, he had a great-grandfather who had stolen a pig from a one-legged gypsy, and she put a curse on him and all his descendants. Stanley and his family didn't believe in curses, of course, but whenever anything went wrong, it felt good to be able to blame someone. Things went wrong a lot. They always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He looked out the window at the vast emptiness. He watched the rise and fall of a telephone wire. In his mind, he could hear his father's gruff voice softly singing to him. If only the woodpecker sighs, the bark on the tree was just a little bit softer, while the wolf waits below, hungry and lonely, he cries to me, the moon, if only, if only. It was a song his father used to sing to him. The melody was sweet and sad, but Stanley's favorite part was when his father would howl the word moon. Okay, so clearly I just read that part wrong. The bus hit a small bump, and the guard sat up, instantly alert. Stanley's father was an inventor. To be a successful inventor, you need 3 things: intelligence, perseverance, and a little bit of luck. Does everybody know what perseverance means? If you don't know what perseverance means, you need to go Google it and then come and tell me what it means tomorrow. Okay, well, not tomorrow because school just got canceled, which is why I have loads of time to read to you tonight. So, once he started a project, he would work on it for years, often going days without sleep. He just never had any luck. Every time an experiment failed, Stanley could hear him cursing his dirty, rotten, pig-stealing grandfather. Stanley's father was also named Stanley. Stanley's father's full name was Stanley Yelnats II. Our Stanley is Stanley Yelnats IV. Lyosha, hey, come here. Hey, come get a cookie. Come on, come here. Everyone in his family had always liked the fact that Stanley Yelnats was spelled the same frontwards and backwards. So they kept naming their son Stanley. Stanley was an only child, as was every other Stanley Yelnats before him. All of them had something else in common. Despite their awful luck, they always remained hopeful. As Stanley's fathers liked to say, I learn from failure. I love that. I like that Stanley's father says that. But perhaps that was part of the curse as well. If Stanley and his father, hey, Lyosha, come here. Boo-boo. Come here. Come on. If Stanley and his father, sorry, now I've got to find my spot again, weren't always hopeful, then it wouldn't hurt so much every time their hopes were crushed. Not every Stanley Yelnats had been a failure, Stanley's mother often pointed out whenever Stanley or his father became so discouraged that they actually started to believe in the curse. The first Stanley Yelnats, Stanley's great-grandfather, had made a fortune in the stock market. He couldn't have been too unlucky. At such times, she neglected to mention the bad luck that befell the first Stanley Yelnats. He lost his entire fortune when he was moving from New York to California. His stagecoach was robbed by the outlaw, Kissin' Kate Barlow. If it weren't for that, Stanley's family would now be living, hey, stop, would now be living in a mansion in California. Instead, they were crammed in a tiny apartment that smelled of burning rubber and foot odor. If only, if only. The apartment smelled the way it did because Stanley's father was trying to invent a way to recycle old sneakers. Oh my gosh, that must make an apartment smell bad. The first person who finds a use for old sneakers, he said, will be a very rich man indeed. It was this latest project that led to Stanley's arrest. The bus ride became became increasingly bumpy because the road was no longer paved. Actually, Stanley had been impressed. Lyosha, stop. Come here. Hey. Stanley had been impressed when he first found out that his great-grandfather was robbed by... Lyosha, you are not making a good impression. Come here. Come on, come here. I'm gonna cookie. Had been impressed when he first found out that his great-grandfather was robbed by Kissin' Kate Barlow. True, he would have preferred living on the beach in California, but it was still kind of cool to have someone in your family robbed by a famous outlaw. Kate Barlow didn't actually kiss Stanley's great-grandfather. That would have been really cool, but she only kissed the men when she killed them. Instead, she robbed him and left him stranded in the middle of the desert. He was lucky to have survived, Stanley's mother was quick to point out. The bus was slowing down. The guard grunted as he stretched his arms. "Welcome to Camp Green Lake," said the driver. Stanley looked out the dirty window. He couldn't see a lake, and hardly anything was green. That is the end of the 3rd chapter. Tomorrow night, we will start chapter 4, and hopefully Lyosha will be a kinder and quieter dog, and I'll look back at this and make sure it's okay. But have a wonderful snow day tomorrow. Enjoy the snow. Be safe, be respectful, and be responsible, just like we always are at Larson Heights. And I will see you all on Friday. Come tell me what perseverance means. Okay, have a great day. Bye.